No one expected the groom to freeze at the altar, not in a cathedral filled with silk dresses, flashing cameras, and whispered envy, not when the music was already fading into vows. But then an old woman stepped forward. Her clothes were worn, her hands trembled. Security moved to drag her away. Before anyone could stop her, she reached David Chibwe, leaned close, and whispered 6 words that drained the color from his face. The billionaire's hands shook. The wedding stopped breathing. And in that silence, one truth threatened to destroy everything he thought he knew. Before we begin this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. And if stories about kindness, destiny, and hidden truths move your heart, subscribe to this channel. You won't want to miss what happens next. Long before the white flowers filled the cathedral, before tailored suits, luxury cars, and whispered rumors of a billionaire's wedding, David Chibwe lived by one unbreakable rule. Every morning, no matter how busy the day ahead looked, he drove himself to work. Not the chauffeur, not the armored SUV, just David, alone, windows down, mind quiet. And every morning at exactly 7:10 a.m., his car slowed near the old bus terminal on Cairo Road in Lusaka. That was where he first saw her, Mama Adanna. She sat on a cracked concrete block near the bus stop, her back slightly bent, a small wooden tray balanced on her knees. On it were lottery tickets, 2 packs of biscuits, and nothing else. No loud begging, no shouting, no chasing after passers-by, just waiting. The first day, David barely noticed her. He was thinking about contracts, steel shipments, numbers that never slept. His phone rang. He stopped near the curb, searching for better signal. That was when a soft voice reached his open window. "Sir, please." David turned. She stood slowly, careful with her bad leg. Her clothes were faded but clean. Her hair was wrapped in a dull blue scarf. Her eyes, dark, steady, and tired, met his. "I don't need much," she said. "Just $10. David frowned. People asked him for money all the time. Security, assistants, strangers who somehow knew his name. They asked for thousands, tens of thousands, investments, donations. But this woman, $10. That's all he asked. She nodded. "That's all I need today." Something about the way she said today unsettled him. David reached into his wallet, handed her a crisp bill, and nodded once. No questions, no speeches. She didn't smile widely. She didn't bow. She didn't bless him loudly. She simply said, "Thank you, sir. May God remember you." As he drove away, David told himself it was nothing. Just another morning. But the next day, she was there again, same spot. Same tray, same quiet posture. Again she stood when she saw him slow down. "Good morning, sir," she said gently. "Please, $10. David hesitated. "Didn't I give you money yesterday?" "Yes," she replied calmly. "And I was grateful." "So why are you asking again?" "Because yesterday is finished." That answer stayed with him longer than it should have. He gave her the money. The third day, she didn't even ask. She simply looked at him. And David, without fully understanding why, reached for his wallet before she spoke. $10, every morning, rain or sun, traffic or silence, busy or free. Mama Adanna was always there, and she always asked for the same thing, never more, never less. After 2 weeks, David noticed something else. She never spent the money near the bus stop. Sometimes he parked across the street and watched from inside his car. Mama Adanna would wait until he was gone, then slowly make her way to a small roadside pharmacy. Other days, she bought bread. Occasionally, she paid a bus conductor even though she walked most places. No alcohol, no gambling, no waste. Once, out of curiosity, David followed her. Not closely, not like a spy, just from a distance. She entered a public hospital, one of the overcrowded ones, the kind most people avoided unless they had no choice. David watched her speak to the front desk, pull out crumpled bills, count carefully. $10. That night, David couldn't sleep. He thought about his mother, Esther Chibwe. He hadn't thought of her in years, not like this. Esther had raised him alone, sold vegetables, cleaned offices at night, and when she fell sick, when money ran out, she too had stood near bus stops, asking strangers for help. David sat up in bed, heart pounding. The next morning, he didn't slow down. He drove past the bus stop. Mama Adanna watched his car disappear. She did not chase him. She did not shout. She simply sat back down. That image haunted him all day. By evening, guilt gnawed at his chest like hunger. The following morning, David arrived earlier than usual. Mama Adanna was already there. When she saw him, she didn't look surprised. "I knew you would come back," she said softly. "How?" David asked. She smiled faintly. "People always do, when they remember who they used to be." David handed her the money, then paused. "Why $10?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. "Because that is what I once needed," she replied, "and someone gave it to me." David swallowed. "Who?" She shook her head. "That is not a story for the road." From that day on, something changed. David didn't just give the money. He greeted her, asked if she was well, asked if her leg hurt, asked if she had eaten. Mama Adanna answered politely but never invited more questions. And she never crossed one line. She never asked for his name, never asked what he did, never asked where he lived. She treated him like a passing stranger, even though he saw her every morning. Then, one afternoon, David mentioned her casually at home. Joy Cheruyo looked up from her phone. "The old woman?" she asked. "The one near the bus stop?" David nodded. "Yes." Joy frowned. "Why are you still giving her money? It's not much. That's not the point." Joy said. "People like that become dependent." David stiffened. "She asks for $10. Joy laughed softly. "Today it's 10. Tomorrow it's something else." But tomorrow came, and Mama Adanna asked for $10. Nothing more, nothing less. As weeks passed, David began to feel something unfamiliar when he saw her. Not pity, recognition, as if her presence was tied to something unfinished in his life, something waiting. And far away, unknown to him, Mama Adanna began counting days, not the days until her money ran out, but the days until David Chibwe would finally remember the truth. Mama Adanna's days followed a rhythm the city never noticed. Before the sun fully rose over Lusaka, before the horns and engines swallowed the quiet, she was already awake. Her small room, barely more than a concrete box behind an old mechanic's shop, held only what she needed: a thin mattress, a wooden chair, a Bible with worn edges, and a framed photograph placed carefully near the window. Every morning she sat on the edge of her bed, massaging her left leg. The old injury had never healed properly. Some days it burned like fire. Other days it felt numb, as if it did not belong to her anymore. She never complained. After wrapping her scarf and straightening her dress, she knelt slowly and prayed. "God," she whispered, voice trembling but steady, "thank you for another day. Give strength to the man who gives without asking, and give me patience to wait." She did not ask for wealth. She did not ask for miracles. She asked for time. At the bus terminal, Mama Adanna took her place as the city came alive around her. Vendors shouted prices, conductors argued, children ran barefoot between buses, and people passed her, hundreds of them, eyes forward, hearts elsewhere. She never stopped them. She never begged loudly. She waited. Some days David Chibwe arrived early, other days traffic delayed him, but Mama Adanna never doubted he would come. And every time he did, she watched his face carefully, not greedily, not desperately, as if she was reading something written beneath his skin. After receiving the $10, she followed the same path. First, the pharmacy. She bought medicine for her blood pressure, the cheapest brand. The pharmacist knew her well and often tried to give her more. "Take extra," the young woman would say. "You'll need it." Mama Adanna always shook her head. "No, others need it too." Next, she stopped by a small bread stall and bought a single loaf. She tore it in half. Half for now, half for later. Some days she shared pieces with street children who hovered nearby watching. They called her Grandma. She never told them her name. On Tuesdays and Thursdays she went to the public hospital, not for herself. In one of the crowded wards lay an old woman who could no longer speak. Once years ago, that woman had shared a sleeping mat with Mama Adanna when both of them had nothing. Mama Adanna paid for her basic care whenever she could. $10. Always $10. Meanwhile, David's curiosity deepened. He began to notice how Mama Adanna never lingered near expensive shops, never followed wealthy strangers, never tried to increase her visibility. One morning, rain poured heavily. David assumed she would not come. But there she was, sitting beneath a torn umbrella, shoes soaked, waiting. "Why are you here in this weather?" David asked, concern slipping into his voice before he could stop it. She smiled faintly. "Rain does not cancel waiting." David laughed softly, shaking his head. "You're unbelievable." "No," she replied. "I'm patient." That word patient pressed against something deep inside him. Over time, David began bringing extra items in his car. A bottle of water, sometimes fruit, once a thick shawl. Mama Adanna accepted them politely, but something about her posture remained unchanged. She did not lean in. She did not grow familiar. She never crossed into his life. It was David who crossed into hers. One afternoon, he parked the car and stepped out. The people nearby froze. Some recognized him instantly. Phones appeared. Whispers spread. Mama Adanna looked up startled. "You shouldn't stand," she said quickly. "People will talk." David smiled. "Let them." He sat beside her on the concrete block. The ground was hard, hot, unforgiving. David did not care. They sat in silence for a long moment, traffic roaring behind them. "Do you have children?" he asked gently. Mama Adanna's fingers tightened around her Bible. "I had a daughter," she said after a pause. David waited. She was strong. Mama Adanna continued. "Braver than me. She loved too deeply, trusted too much." Her voice softened. The world was not kind to her. David felt his chest tighten. "I'm sorry." "So am I," she said. "Every day." He wanted to ask more, but something told him not to. Instead, he asked, "Why do you keep waiting here?" Mama Adanna looked straight ahead. "Because someone I am waiting for will pass here." David smiled gently. "You already see hundreds of people." "Yes," she said. "But only one matters." That night, David dreamed of his mother. Not as she was when she died, weak and pale, but as she was when he was a boy, laughing, sweating under the sun, holding his hand tightly as buses roared past. When he woke, his pillow was damp. The next morning, he arrived at the bus stop shaken. Mama Adanna noticed immediately. "You are carrying heavy thoughts," she said. David exhaled. "You remind me of someone." She nodded slowly. "Most things that matter do." From that day on, David stopped seeing Mama Adanna as a responsibility. He saw her as a mirror. He adjusted his schedule to ensure he never missed her. He defended her when Joy questioned him. He even instructed his driver never to disturb her if he was absent. Mama Adanna remained unchanged, still asking for $10, still thanking him quietly, still waiting. And every time David handed her the money, he felt something loosening inside him, a knot tied long ago by poverty loss and unanswered questions. He did not know what she was waiting for, but he felt it in his bones. Whatever it was coming closer. Joy. Chiruiyat noticed the change before David ever mentioned Mama Adanna's name again. At first it was small things. David stopped taking morning calls in the car. He drove more slowly. He arrived at meetings quieter than usual, his mind clearly somewhere else. Joy had known David long enough to recognize when something occupied him, and whatever it was, it didn't look like business pressure. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of David's penthouse, overlooking Lusaka's glowing streets, Joy finally asked, "You've been distracted lately," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. "Is something wrong at work?" David shook his head. "Work is fine." "Then what is it?" She pressed eyes narrowing slightly. "You disappear every morning. No calls, no driver, no explanation." David hesitated. He hadn't planned to talk about Mama Adanna. Something about the woman felt private, sacred even, but Joy was his fiancée. Soon she would be his wife. "There's an old woman I help," he said carefully. Joy blinked. "Help?" "Yes, near the bus terminal." Joy set her glass down slowly. "Help?" How David shrugged. "I give her some money, every day." "How much? $10? Joy laughed, short, sharp, surprised. "Every day, yes." "For how long?" "A few weeks." Joy leaned back, studying him as if he had just confessed to something foolish. "David, do you realize how many people hang around bus terminals looking for sympathy?" "She's not like that," he replied instantly. Joy raised an eyebrow. "You sound very sure." "I am." Joy sighed. "Listen to yourself. You don't even know her name, do you?" David opened his mouth, then closed it. Joy noticed. "You don't," she said quietly. "David, this is exactly how people get taken advantage of." "She never asks for more," he said. "Never." Joy crossed her arms. "That's how it starts." David felt irritation rise. "You haven't met her, and I don't need to," Joy replied. "I've seen this before. People attach themselves emotionally. Then they guilt you. Then they depend on you. That hasn't happened yet." Her tone sharpened. "You're a public figure, David. You're about to become my husband. What happens when the media finds out you've been secretly giving money to a stranger?" David's jaw tightened. "I'm not ashamed of helping someone." Joy paused, then softened her voice. I'm not saying you should stop helping people. I'm saying there are proper channels, foundations, programs, not random individuals on the street. David stood. This conversation isn't about charity strategy. No, Joy replied, standing too. It's about boundaries. The word landed hard. The next morning, Joy insisted on riding with David. I want to see her, she said, already dressed, heels clicking across the floor. David frowned. That's not necessary. I'm coming, she replied firmly. If she's as harmless as you say, there shouldn't be a problem. David said nothing. At the bus terminal, Mama Adanna was already there. Joy spotted her immediately. The old woman's posture, her worn clothes, the small tray, Joy took it all in with a critical eye. She watched as David slowed the car and rolled down his window. Mama Adanna smiled when she saw him. Then she noticed Joy. Her smile faded slightly, not from fear, but awareness. David handed her the $10. Good morning, Mama Adanna, said, her voice gentle. She nodded politely toward Joy. You are welcome. Joy did not return the greeting. Instead, she leaned forward. Why are you here every day? She asked bluntly. Mama Adanna turned to her calmly. Because this is where I wait. For what Joy asked, Mama Adanna's eyes flicked briefly to David, then back to Joy. For what God has promised. Joy scoffed quietly. And God promised you $10 from my fiancée. David stiffened. Joy. Mama Adanna raised a hand slightly. It's all right. She looked at Joy again. Young woman, I do not take what is not given. Joy folded her arms. And how long do you plan to keep taking? As long as it is offered? The silence between them thickened. David felt something close to anger rising in his chest. Joy, that's enough. She exhaled sharply. Fine, let's go. As they drove away, Joy stared out the window, lips pressed tight. She's clever, Joy said after a moment. Very clever. David said nothing. That afternoon, Joy made a decision. She called the head of security at the cathedral where their wedding would be held. There's a woman, she said, her voice smooth, an elderly woman who frequents the bus terminal near Cairo Road. If she tries to attend the wedding, she is not to be allowed inside. The man hesitated. Is she a threat? Joy paused. She's unstable, understood, he replied. That evening, David arrived home unusually late. He found Joy weighting documents spread across the table. I spoke to Samuel today, she said casually. David froze. About what? Your mother, Joy replied. Or rather, about her past. David's blood ran cold. Why would you do that? Joy looked up. Because you're hiding something from me. I'm not hiding anything, he said tightly. My mother is gone. Yes, Joy said, and apparently she spent her final years poor, desperate, asking strangers for help. David's hands clenched. Stop. Joy leaned forward. Don't you see the pattern? That woman reminds you of her? That's why you can't let go. David turned away. Joy softened her tone again. David, I love you, but you can't build a future while clinging to ghosts. David did not respond. The next morning, David was delayed by an urgent meeting. When he arrived at the bus terminal, Mama Adanna was not there. He waited. 10 minutes, 20, she never came. An unfamiliar unease settled in his chest. Across the city, Mama Adanna stood outside the cathedral gates, leaning heavily on her walking stick. She looked at the towering building, its doors still closed. It is almost time, she whispered. And for the first time in weeks, she did not wait at the bus terminal. The absence hit David Chibwe harder than he expected. At first he told himself it was nothing. People missed days. Life happened. But as the minutes stretched and the bus terminal grew louder, his unease refused to fade. Mama Adanna was never late, never absent. David drove past the terminal twice before continuing to the office. The contracts waiting on his desk felt distant, meaningless. His pen hovered above paper as memories he hadn't invited began to surface. His mother, Esther Chibwe. He hadn't planned to think of her that morning yet. Her face appeared with unsettling clarity, the lines around her eyes, the way she tied her headscarf tightly when she was worried, the soft hum she made while counting coins at night. Esther had been proud. Too proud. She never spoke about the worst days. David only learned pieces of the truth after she was gone. How she'd lost her job cleaning offices when the company downsized. How the rent fell behind. How sickness crept in quietly, stealing her strength. And how one afternoon she had taken David by the hand and walked to a bus terminal, not unlike the one Mama Adanna sat beside. She had asked strangers for help. Not loudly, not desperately, just enough to survive. David remembered that day now, the shame he felt as a child, the way he'd stared at the ground while adults walked past. He remembered one woman stopping, an older woman, her face kind, her hands rough with age. She had given his mother money. $10. David's chest tightened. At the office he called Samuel. "Do you remember anything about the woman who helped our mother?" he asked without greeting. Samuel hesitated. "Why are you asking now?" "Just answer me." "I was younger than you," Samuel said slowly. "But I remember an older woman, lame in one leg. She used to bring bread sometimes." David closed his eyes. The resemblance was no longer coincidence. That evening, he drove back to the bus terminal long after sunset. Vendors were packing up. Buses pulled away in clouds of dust. Mama Adanna's spot was empty. "Have you seen the old woman?" David asked a nearby vendor. The man shook his head. "Not today. What about yesterday? Maybe early." He shrugged. "She said she wouldn't be coming anymore." David's heart skipped. "She said that, yes, she told the children goodbye." David drove home in silence. At the penthouse, Joy noticed his agitation immediately. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. David ignored her and went straight to his study. He pulled out an old box he hadn't opened in years, his mother's things. Letters, receipts, hospital papers. At the bottom lay a folded piece of paper, a name, Adanna. David stared at it, breath shallow. Joy stood at the doorway watching. "You found something," she said quietly. "Yes," David replied, his voice tight. "Something you didn't want me to find." Joy crossed her arms. "What are you talking about?" that woman, David said. "She knew my mother." Joy scoffed. "David, you're projecting." "She helped her," he continued. "She helped us." Joy's expression hardened. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. It changes everything," David snapped. Joy stepped closer. "What exactly do you think this means, that she's entitled to your life, your wedding, your future?" David looked at her. "I think it means I owe her more than $10. Joy shook her head. "This obsession is dangerous." The word struck him. Obsessed. David turned away. The next few days passed in tension. Mama Adanna did not return to the bus terminal. David sent Lydia to search nearby clinics and shelters. No sign. The unease grew into dread. Meanwhile, Joy focused on the wedding. Invitations finalized. Seating arrangements confirmed. Security tightened. Every detail was perfect. Too perfect. The night before the wedding, David couldn't sleep. He stood on the balcony, staring at the city lights, wondering how a woman who asked for so little had come to mean so much. Across town, Mama Adanna sat on a wooden bench outside the cathedral. She had arrived hours earlier, moving slowly, leaning heavily on her stick. The guards at the gate watched her with suspicion, but said nothing for now. She wasn't there to cause trouble. She was there to keep a promise. In her bag, wrapped carefully in cloth, was a small envelope. Inside it lay an old hospital bracelet, faded and cracked, bearing a name David knew by heart. Esther Chibwe. Mama Adanna touched it gently. "You said he would come back," she whispered. And he did. Morning came. The city woke to celebration. Cars lined the streets. Music echoed. Guests arrived dressed in silk and gold. Inside the cathedral, David stood in a private room adjusting his cufflinks. Samuel watched him closely. "You don't look happy," Samuel said. "I'm not sure I should be here," David admitted. Samuel frowned. "What do you mean?" David hesitated. "If the past is still knocking, maybe I shouldn't be walking forward yet." Samuel opened his mouth to respond, but the door opened. Joy stepped in, radiant in white. "For today," she said softly, "let's forget everything else." David looked at her, searching her face. He wondered what would happen if he didn't. Outside, Mama Adanna rose slowly from the bench as the cathedral doors opened. The music began, and with every step David took toward the altar, the truth he had avoided drew closer. The morning of the wedding unfolded like a carefully rehearsed performance. White fabric draped the cathedral walls. Flowers lined the aisle in perfect symmetry. Guests filled the pews, their whispers floating like soft echoes under the high ceiling. Everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look, and yet David Chibwe felt as if he were walking into a room where the air was slowly running out. As the groom's procession began, applause rose gently. Cameras flashed, faces smiled. David's steps were steady, but his mind was not. With each movement toward the altar, his thoughts drifted backward, away from Joy's radiant smile, away from the polished shoes and tailored suit, back to cracked pavements, dusty bus terminals, and a quiet old woman who asked for only $10, Mama Adanna. He scanned the cathedral unconsciously, though he told himself he wasn't looking for her. She wouldn't be here. Joy had made that clear. The ceremony began. Pastor Nathan Wansa spoke warmly about love, partnership, and destiny. His voice was calm, practiced reassuring. Joy stood across from David, glowing. Her hands were steady, her smile unwavering. David tried to mirror her composure, but then movement. Near the back of the cathedral, a murmur rippled through the guests. David's eyes shifted instinctively. An elderly woman stood just inside the doors. Her clothes were plain, her posture bent. A walking stick supported her weight. For a brief moment she looked impossibly small beneath the towering arches. Mama Adanna. Before David could react, two security guards moved toward her. "Ma'am, you're not on the list," one whispered sharply. She nodded. "I know. Then you need to leave." She did not resist. She did not argue. "I will speak to him," she said softly. "Then I will go." "That's not possible." David watched, heart pounding, as the guards reached for her arms. "Stop!" His voice echoed through the cathedral. Everything froze. David stepped forward, ignoring the pastor's startled expression, ignoring Joy's sudden grip on his arm. "Let her come," he said. The guards hesitated, glancing at Joy. Joy's face hardened. "David, this is not the time." David did not look at her. Mama Adanna walked slowly down the aisle. Every step seemed to carry years of weight. Guests whispered. Phones lifted discreetly. Confusion spread like a stain. She stopped in front of David. Up close, she looked thinner than he remembered. Weaker. Her eyes, however, were sharp with purpose. "You came," David whispered. She nodded. "I said I would." Joy stepped forward. "This is inappropriate," she said firmly. "You are disrupting a sacred ceremony." Mama Adanna turned to her calmly. "I will not stay long." Then she looked back at David. "May I?" she asked. David leaned down instinctively. The cathedral held its breath. Mama Adanna's lips moved close to his ear. "You are the boy from the bus terminal," she whispered. "And your mother did not die the way they told you." David's body went rigid. The world narrowed to a single point of sound. "What did you say?" he breathed. Mama Adanna placed something into his hand, an old hospital bracelet. David stared at it. His mother's name, Esther Chibwe. A low gasp escaped his lips. Joy's voice cut through the silence. "David!" "What is going on?" He looked up at her slowly. The woman he was about to marry stood before him, beautiful, composed, impatient. Behind her, years of silence screamed. David straightened. "I can't continue," he said quietly. Joy laughed nervously. "You're joking." "I'm not." Gasps filled the room. Pastor Mwansa stepped forward. "Son, perhaps we should." David raised a hand. "I need the truth." He turned to Mama Adanna. "Tell me everything." Mama Adanna nodded, her shoulders sagging as if she had been holding this moment for decades. "Your mother came to me sick," she began. "Very sick. She had no money, no family left to help her." David's throat tightened. She collapsed near the terminal. "I took her to the hospital. They asked for money before treatment. We begged." Joy shook her head. "This is not appropriate." Mama Adanna continued. "They delayed." She waited. By the time help came, it was too late. A heavy silence settled. David's hands trembled. "They told you it was sudden," Mama Adanna said. But it was not. It was waiting. David felt something break open inside him. The years of unanswered questions, the guilt, the anger he never allowed himself to feel. Joy grabbed his arm. "David, listen to yourself. This woman is manipulating you." David pulled his arm away. "Stop," he said sharply. Joy recoiled. "You knew," David continued. "You knew my past, and you still tried to keep her away." Joy's eyes flashed. "I was protecting you from this." David shook his head slowly. "You were protecting the wedding." "Not me." He turned back to Mama Adanna. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked. She looked down. "Because you had to come to the truth yourself. I only waited." Tears blurred David's vision. He looked around the cathedral, the wealth, the spectacle, the expectations. Then back at the old woman who had asked for nothing but $10. "I can't marry today," he said clearly. Joy's composure shattered. "You're choosing her over me." David met her gaze. "I'm choosing the truth." Security stepped forward again, uncertain. Pastor Mwansa spoke softly. "Perhaps we should pause." David nodded. "The ceremony is over." Mama Adanna turned to leave. David caught her hand. "Don't go," he said. She looked at him, eyes gentle. "My part is done." "No," David replied firmly. "It's just beginning." As the guests erupted into confusion, as Joy stood frozen in disbelief, David Chibwe walked away from the altar, not in shame, but with a quiet certainty he had never known. Outside sunlight poured through the cathedral doors, and for the first time in years David stepped into it carrying the full weight of his past. The cathedral doors closed behind David Chibwe with a sound that felt final wood, meeting wood, echoing across the stone like a verdict. Outside, the noise of the city rushed back in, car horns, voices, a breeze that carried dust and sunlight. David stood on the steps, chest rising and falling as if he had just run a long distance. Mama Adanna stood a few steps away, leaning on her walking stick. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then David broke the silence. "You waited all these years," he said hoarsely. "Why now?" Mama Adanna looked toward the sky, squinting against the brightness. "Because today was the last day I could wait." David frowned. "What does that mean?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small folded cloth. Her hands shook slightly as she unwrapped it, revealing old papers. Hospital slips, notes written in fading ink, receipts with dates long past. "These are all I have left of her," Mama Adanna said, "and of myself." David took the papers carefully, afraid they might crumble. His eyes scanned familiar words. Emergency ward, delayed admission, payment pending. His stomach tightened. "You were there," he whispered, "when she died." Mama Adanna nodded slowly. I held her hand. David closed his eyes. The image came uninvited. His mother alone on a narrow hospital bed, lights flickering, pain tightening its grip, waiting for help that came too late. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" he asked. Mama Adanna's voice softened. "Because if I came to you as the woman who watched your mother die, you would have helped me out of guilt, not out of kindness." David swallowed hard. "And the $10 he asked, why always the same amount?" She smiled faintly. "Because that is what your mother needed the day she met me. $10, not more, not less." David's knees weakened. He sat on the steps, paper still in his hands. "I didn't even know her last days were like that," he murmured. I thought she went peacefully." Mama Adanna sat beside him with effort. "Parents protect their children, even in dying." For a long time, David said nothing. Inside the cathedral, voices rose: confusion, anger, disbelief. Joy's sharp tone carried through the doors, demanding explanations, demanding control. David didn't turn back. Instead, he called Samuel. "I need you," he said quietly when his brother answered. "Now." Samuel arrived 20 minutes later, breathless, eyes wide. "What happened?" he asked. David handed him the papers. Samuel read silently, his face growing pale. This can't be right." "It is," David replied, "and we're going to prove it." Within hours, the story shifted. News spread fast. Wedding canceled, billionaire walks away from altar. Speculation ignited across social media. But David wasn't watching. He was at the public hospital. The same one Mama Adanna had described. The same one whose walls smelled of antiseptic and neglect. David walked its corridors with Samuel and Mama Adanna, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the sudden recognition. A senior nurse recognized Mama Adanna instantly. "You came back," she said softly. Mama Adanna nodded. "I told you I would." Records were pulled, old logs dusted off, delays documented. It took hours. But by evening, the truth was undeniable. Esther Chibwe had been denied timely treatment due to lack of funds. David stood in the administrator's office, hands planted on the desk. "You let her die," he said calmly. "And then you wrote it as natural causes." The man stammered excuses, underfunding procedures, policies. David listened. Then he spoke. "This hospital will change," he said, "or it will close." That night, David took Mama Adanna to a private clinic. She resisted. "This is not for me," she said. "Yes, it is," David replied gently. "For all the waiting you've done." Doctors examined her thoroughly. Her blood pressure was dangerously high, her leg injury severe. "She needs long-term care," the doctor said. "And rest," David nodded. "She'll get it." Mama Adanna looked at him, eyes wet. "I did not come for this." "I know," David said. "You came for the truth." The next morning, David stood before reporters. "I walked away from my wedding," he said plainly. "Not because of scandal, but because of silence." He spoke of his mother, of Mama Adanna, of a system that failed the poor. He announced a foundation, not in his name, in his mother's. The Esther Chibwe Care Initiative. Funds poured in, but David's focus remained narrow, on Mama Adanna. He visited her daily at the clinic, bringing books, sitting quietly, listening to stories of a life lived mostly unseen. One afternoon, she looked at him thoughtfully. "You have done enough," she said. David shook his head. "I'm just beginning." And somewhere deep inside, for the first time since childhood, the boy who once stood ashamed at a bus terminal finally felt seen. The clinic room was quiet in a way David Chibwe was not used to. not the tense silence of boardrooms, not the awkward pauses of interviews. This was the kind of silence that invited truth. Mama Adanna sat by the window, morning light resting gently on her face. A nurse had just left adjusting her blanket, reminding her to rest. David stood near the door, unsure whether to sit or pace. He chose to sit. For the first time since the wedding day, there were no reporters outside, no phones buzzing, no advisors whispering strategies, just the two of them. David broke the silence. All those years, he said slowly, you could have asked for more. Mama Adanna looked at him, her eyes calm. Yes, you knew who I was, he continued. You knew I could change your life with one word. Yes, then why didn't you? She smiled faintly. Because I wasn't waiting for your money. David frowned. Then what were you waiting for? She turned her gaze toward the window. Outside, the city moved on cars, people, noise, urgency. I was waiting for you to become the man your mother hoped you would be, she said. The words settled heavily between them. David's voice lowered. And the $10, Mama Adanna let out a quiet breath. $10 was never about the amount. It was about memory. She shifted slightly, wincing at the pain in her leg. Your mother asked for $10 the day I met her, she said. She didn't ask for help for herself. She asked for help so you could eat. David closed his eyes. She was already sick. Mama Adanna continued. She knew she didn't have long, but she worried about you. Tears stung David's eyes. She said, if my son ever becomes a man of means, don't let him forget this place. David swallowed hard. She said that Mama Adanna nodded. She trusted that God would finish what she couldn't. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees. All this time, he murmured, I thought I was helping you. Mama Adanna smiled gently. You were helping yourself. That afternoon, Joy Sharuiyo appeared at the clinic. She was impeccably dressed, her expression controlled, but the strain showed in her eyes. David was not surprised. You humiliated me, she said without greeting. David stood slowly. You came to argue. I came to understand, Joy replied, because everything you've done since that day makes no sense. David gestured toward Mama Adanna. This is why. Joy glanced at the old woman briefly, then back at David. A tragic story doesn't justify destroying your future. Mama Adanna spoke softly. Child, no future built on silence lasts. Joy stiffened. With respect, this is between me and him. David shook his head. No, this is exactly where we went wrong. Joy's voice trembled. I stood by you. I supported you. I helped build your image. You helped protect my comfort, David replied. Not my conscience. Joy's eyes flashed. So you choose guilt over love, David met her gaze. I choose truth over performance. Silence filled the room. Joy exhaled sharply. Then we are done. She turned to leave. Before exiting, she paused. One day, she said without turning around, you'll regret letting the past ruin what you could have had. David didn't answer. Mama Adanna watched Joy leave, then turned to David. She is not evil, she said gently. She is afraid. David nodded. But fear doesn't get to lead my life anymore. The days that followed were heavy but purposeful. David immersed himself in work, but different work. He reviewed hospital policies, met with public health advocates, listened more than he spoke. Mama Adanna's condition improved slowly. Physical therapy helped her leg. Proper medication stabilized her blood pressure. One evening, as David prepared to leave the clinic, she called him back. David, she said. Yes, you still haven't asked me the most important question. He frowned. What question? Why I stopped waiting. David froze. What do you mean? Mama Adanna reached into her bag and pulled out a small calendar. Several dates were circled. My doctor told me I didn't have much time, she said calmly. I knew I couldn't wait forever. David's chest tightened. But you're getting better. Yes, she said, because you remembered. She took his hand. I didn't come to stop your wedding, she said. I came to give you peace before I left this world. David's eyes filled. You're not leaving. She smiled. We all leave. What matters is what we leave behind. That night, David sat alone in his apartment staring at the city lights. For the first time, the noise didn't overwhelm him. He thought about waiting, about how some people waited for money, others waited for love, and some waited for someone to finally see them. Mama Adanna had waited for truth. And now that it had arrived, David realized something else was waiting too. Consequences. The public had praised his decision. Donations poured in, but powerful people were uneasy. Hospitals feared audits. Politicians avoided his calls. Samuel warned him, "You're making enemies." David replied simply, "I'm making room." As he prepared to sleep, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "The truth you uncovered goes deeper than you think. If you keep digging, be ready." David stared at the screen. For the first time, he understood. Stopping the wedding had only opened the door. What lay beyond it would demand even more courage. The warning message did not leave David Chibwe's mind. It followed him through meetings. It echoed during late-night drives. It sat quietly beside him in the clinic room while Mama Adanna slept. "The truth you uncovered goes deeper than you think." David showed the message to Samuel the next morning. Samuel read it twice, jaw tightening. "This isn't an empty threat." "I know," David replied. "Do you want me to track the number?" "Yes," quietly. Samuel nodded. "And David, you should slow down." David looked at him. "Slow down, you've already shaken powerful people." Samuel said carefully, "Hospitals, officials, sponsors tied to your foundation. This isn't charity anymore, it's exposure." David leaned back in his chair. "My mother waited because she was poor. Mama Adanna waited because she believed. If I slow down now, I become part of what killed her." Samuel said nothing. Across town, Joy Cheruiyot watched the news in silence. The headlines praised David's courage. Commentators called him principled, visionary, a man who chose morality over spectacle. Joy turned off the television. The applause made her stomach churn. Her phone rang. "Hello, you should be careful," a voice said. "Your former fiancé is stirring things up." Joy stiffened. "Who is this, a friend?" the voice replied. "And possibly your last chance to protect your future." Joy hung up, hands trembling. That afternoon, David returned to the bus terminal alone. Mama Adanna's spot was empty, of course, but standing there, David felt something settle inside him. He watched people pass, watched mothers pull children close, watched men avert their eyes. He saw himself. A black sedan rolled to a stop nearby. A man stepped out, well-dressed, confident, unfamiliar. "Mr. Chibwe," he said smoothly. "My name is Paul Nyambe. I represent several private healthcare investors." David didn't shake his hand. "What do you want?" Paul smiled thinly. "To advise you." "You're reopening old wounds." "Good," David replied. Paul lowered his voice. "You're accusing institutions of negligence. People will push back." David met his gaze. "Let them." Paul sighed. "Your foundation could lose support. Your businesses could face audits." David shrugged. "Then they'll survive scrutiny." Paul studied him for a long moment. "Your mother's case wasn't unique," he said quietly. "If you expose everything, the system collapses." David stepped closer. "Then it should." Paul shook his head slowly. "Idealism is expensive." "So is silence," David replied. Paul left without another word. That evening, Mama Adanna sensed David's tension. "You are carrying war inside you," she said gently. "I'm carrying responsibility," David replied. She studied him. "Responsibility without rest becomes pride." David sat beside her. "I don't want revenge, I want change." Mama Adanna nodded. "Then remember who you are changing this for." That night Samuel called back. "The number is untraceable," he said. "But I found something else." David straightened. "What hospital records were altered?" Samuel said. "Multiple cases. Not just your mother." David closed his eyes. "There's a pattern," Samuel continued. "Delayed treatment for patients without upfront payment. Death certificates adjusted." David's voice hardened. "We expose it." Samuel hesitated. "David, this will get ugly." "It already is," David replied. The next day, Joy requested a meeting. David agreed. Public place, daytime, no secrecy. They sat across from each other at a quiet cafe. Joy spoke first. "You're changing," she said. David nodded. "I hope so." Joy sighed. "You're throwing away everything we planned. I'm building something else." She leaned forward. "Do you know how this looks?" "You walked away from a woman for an old stranger." David met her gaze calmly. "I walked toward the truth." Joy's voice wavered. "And where does that leave me?" David softened. "It leaves you free to choose what you truly value." Joy looked away. "You think you're a hero?" "No," David replied. "I think I was blind." Joy stood abruptly. "If you continue this crusade, don't expect mercy." David watched her walk away, feeling neither anger nor regret, only clarity. Days passed, investigations began, journalists followed leads, hospitals denied accusations, officials issued statements. Mama Adanna watched from the clinic bed as the world finally listened. One evening, David found her staring at the ceiling. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. She smiled. "I was afraid when I waited alone. I'm not afraid now." David took her hand. "I won't let them bury this." She squeezed gently. "Then, promise me one thing, anything. Don't let anger become your reason." David nodded slowly. Outside, the city buzzed with tension. Inside David, something steadied. He understood now this wasn't about charity or guilt or even justice alone. It was about choosing who he would become when the world pushed back, and the world was pushing. Pressure arrived quietly at first. A delayed permit, a postponed meeting, a bank suddenly reviewing long-standing agreements. David Chibwe noticed the pattern immediately. By the end of the week, 3 projects under his construction firm had been paused for regulatory clarification. Suppliers called with nervous voices. Partners asked for reassurance. Samuel laid out the facts in David's office, his tone controlled but tense. "They're squeezing you from the edges," he said. "Not enough to look like retaliation, just enough to slow you down." David leaned back, eyes steady. "Then we move forward anyway." Samuel hesitated. "There's more." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photographs. Mama Adanna leaving the clinic, Mama Adanna sitting by the window, Mama Adanna speaking to a nurse. David's jaw tightened. "They're watching her," Samuel said. This crossed a line. David stood immediately. "Increase security, discreetly, no uniforms. That will draw attention. Do it anyway." That evening, David went to the clinic earlier than usual. Mama Adanna was awake, her Bible open in her lap. She looked up as he entered and smiled, but the smile faded when she saw his expression. "What happened?" she asked. "They're pushing back," David replied, "and they're watching you." Mama Adanna closed the Bible slowly. "I expected this." David sat beside her. "I won't let them intimidate you." She nodded gently. "Fear has many disguises. Even power fears losing itself." David exhaled. "I'm not backing down." "I know," she said. "That's why I worry." David frowned. "Worry?" She reached for his hand. When a man discovers his purpose, the world tests whether he deserves it. The next morning, a letter arrived. No return address, no signature, just a sentence. "Some truths are better buried with the dead." David read it twice, then folded it carefully. He didn't show Samuel. He didn't show the press. Instead, he went to the bus terminal. Standing in the exact spot where Mama Adanna used to sit, David closed his eyes. He listened to the city breathe. He remembered the boy he once was, hungry, ashamed, invisible. He opened his eyes. "I won't bury this," he said aloud. Across the city, Joy Sharuio sat in a quiet office, hands folded tightly. The man across from her spoke calmly. "You still have influence." Joy looked up sharply. "You want me to talk to him?" "Yes," the man replied. "Appeal to his emotions, his past. Remind him what he's risking." Joy swallowed. "And if I refuse?" The man smiled faintly. "Then you risk being remembered as the woman who stood in the way of progress." Joy left without answering. That afternoon, David received another call, this one from the hospital administrator. "We'd like to settle," the man said carefully. "Privately." David's voice was cold. "There is no private settlement for public neglect." The line went dead. That night, Mama Adanna's condition worsened. Her blood pressure spiked suddenly. Alarms sounded. Nurses rushed in. David stood outside the room, fists clenched, helpless in a way money could not fix. When the doctor emerged, David searched his face. "She's stable," the doctor said, "but her heart is weak. Stress doesn't help." David nodded, guilt pressing heavily against his chest. Inside the room, Mama Adanna smiled faintly when she saw him. "You look like a man carrying stones," she said. "I'm sorry," David replied softly. "This is because of me." She shook her head. "No, this is because of time." He took her hand. "I should stop." Mama Adanna's grip tightened slightly. "No." David looked at her surprised. "If you stop now," she continued, "then my waiting meant nothing." Tears burned his eyes. "You didn't wait so I could rest," she said gently. "You waited so I could stand." David nodded slowly. The next day, the press conference happened. David stood before microphones, calm and composed. He presented documents, records, testimonies. He named hospitals. He named dates. He named patterns. The room erupted. Officials denied, lawyers threatened, but the evidence was undeniable. By evening, government inquiries were announced. That night, Samuel entered David's apartment with urgent news. Mama Adanna is missing. David's blood ran cold. What? She left the clinic this afternoon, Samuel said. No guards saw her go. No one knows where she is. David grabbed his jacket. We find her. They searched shelters, bus terminals, churches. Hours passed. Near midnight, David's phone rang. A soft, familiar voice spoke. I'm where it began, Mama Adanna said. David knew instantly. The bus terminal. He arrived to find her sitting on the concrete block alone, the city quieter, now shadows long. Why, he asked, breathless. She smiled weakly. I wanted to sit here one last time. David knelt beside her. You scared me. She looked at him gently. Then you understand what waiting costs, he helped her stand. You don't have to do this alone. She nodded. I know. That's why I came back to remind you where strength comes from. As they walked toward the car, David felt the weight of the moment. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. The waiting was almost over. The city seemed to exhale after midnight. Traffic thinned, neon signs dimmed. The bus terminal returned to its quieter rhythm, the kind of quiet that still carried footsteps and memories. David Chibwe drove Mama Adanna back to the clinic without speaking, his hands steady on the wheel, his thoughts anything but. She broke the silence first. You are learning something many men learn too late, she said softly. Power does not begin when people listen. It begins when you do. David glanced at her. I don't feel powerful. She smiled faintly. Good. Back at the clinic, nurses fussed gently over Mama Adanna, scolding her for leaving. David waited outside until the doctor assured him she was stable again, fragile but safe. As dawn approached, David's phone buzzed nonstop. Journalists wanted interviews, activists wanted endorsements, lawyers wanted statements, politicians wanted meetings. Everyone wanted a piece of him now. Samuel arrived just before sunrise, coffee in hand, eyes tired. The inquiry is real, he said. Not cosmetic. They've suspended 2 administrators already. David nodded. Good, but there's backlash. Samuel continued. Hospitals are claiming budget shortages. Some are painting you as reckless. David sighed. Let them. Samuel hesitated. There's something else. Joy. David's expression didn't change. What about her? She's been speaking privately with some of the same people pushing back. Samuel said carefully. I don't know where she stands. David leaned against the wall. She's free to choose. By late morning, David returned home to change clothes. The penthouse felt unfamiliar now, too quiet, too polished, like a place that belonged to another version of him. As he stood before the mirror tying his tie, he caught his own reflection and paused. For the first time, he didn't see the billionaire. He saw the boy at the bus terminal. He loosened the tie and left it on the counter. At noon, David stood before a small group at the clinic. Doctors, nurses, patients, families. No cameras, no speeches. I'm not here to make promises I can't keep, he said simply. I'm here to listen. They told their stories. A woman whose husband died waiting for treatment, a mother who sold her wedding ring for medicine, a nurse who watched patients turned away and carried the guilt home every night. David listened, and with every story his resolve deepened. That afternoon, Mama Adanna asked to see him. You're building something big, she said when he sat beside her bed. Make sure it has room for mercy. David nodded. I will. She reached for his hand. There is something else you should know. He leaned in. What is it? She smiled gently. Your mother didn't just hope you'd remember the poor. She hoped you'd forgive yourself. David's breath caught. Forgive myself for what? For surviving, Mama Adanna said softly. For leaving when she stayed, for becoming strong when she grew weak. Tears slipped down David's face, unashamed. I've carried that guilt my whole life, he whispered. She squeezed his hand. Then let it go. That evening, David received a message from Joy. We need to talk, in person. He agreed. They met at a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. No cameras, no entourage. Joy arrived composed, but there was a tightness around her eyes. You've become a symbol, she said after they sat. People see you as a hero now. David shook his head. I'm just doing what I should have done earlier. Joy studied him. Do you know what it costs to stand where you're standing? Yes, David replied. Everything. Joy looked down at her hands. I wanted a life that was safe. David nodded. So did I. She looked up. And now I want a life that's honest. Silence stretched between them. Joy exhaled slowly. Then we were never meant to walk the same path. David met her gaze. No, we weren't. She stood, her voice steady but sad. I hope your waiting was worth it. David replied softly. It already is. Joy left without looking back. That night, David returned to the clinic. Mama Adanna was asleep, her breathing shallow but peaceful. David sat beside her, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. He thought about waiting, about how Mama Adanna had waited in public places invisible to most, about how his mother had waited in a hospital hallway, about how he had waited his whole life to understand why their stories were tied together. His phone buzzed again. Samuel, they want you to run for public office, Samuel said. People are asking. David smiled faintly. Not yet. What do you want then? David looked at Mama Adanna, at the lines of time on her face, at the quiet strength that had changed his life. I want systems that don't require waiting, he said. I want dignity to be automatic. Samuel laughed softly. That's a big dream. So is becoming a billionaire, David replied. As dawn approached once more, Mama Adanna stirred. She opened her eyes and found David still there. You stayed, she said. David smiled. I'm not going anywhere. She nodded, content. Then, whatever comes next, you're ready. Outside, the city began to wake again. And for the first time, David Chibwe felt ready, not for applause, not for power, but for the long, patient work of change. The first sign that the tide was turning came quietly, not with an announcement, not with applause. It came with a knock. David Chibwe was at the clinic when two officials arrived, plainclothes, neutral expressions, folders tucked under their arms. They asked to speak privately. David led them to a small consultation room, the hum of machines seeping through the walls. We're here on behalf of the inquiry, one of them said. We need your cooperation. David nodded. You have it. They laid out their questions carefully. Dates, names, procedures. David answered without hesitation. When he didn't know something, he said so. When he did, he backed it with documents Samuel had prepared. After an hour, the officials exchanged a look. You should know, the second said, lowering his voice. This is bigger than we expected. David didn't smile. It always is. That afternoon, the inquiry expanded. Hospitals in neighboring districts were added. Former administrators were summoned. A senior official resigned for personal reasons. The news cycle exploded again, this time with substance. But with momentum came resistance. That night, a protest formed outside one of David's offices. Signs accused him of destroying local healthcare and serving foreign interests. The irony wasn't lost on him. He watched from a distance as security kept things calm. Samuel stood beside him. They're trying to change the narrative. They always do. David replied. The following morning, Mama Adanna asked to be moved. Moved, David asked, surprised. Where? To the old ward, she said. The public one. David shook his head. No, you need quiet. Care. She met his eyes. I need to be seen. David understood then. The private room had kept her safe but invisible. She wanted witnesses. Reluctantly, he agreed. When Mama Adanna was wheeled into the public ward, murmurs followed. Some recognized her from the news, others from the bus terminal. A few simply saw an old woman who carried herself like someone who had already made peace with the world. Patients approached quietly. You're the one who waited, a young man said. Mama Adanna smiled. We all wait for something. Word spread. Journalists tried to enter. The hospital refused. But stories leaked anyway about the woman who never asked for more, about the billionaire who stopped a wedding. Pressure mounted. That evening, David received a call from a minister. We need to talk, the man said. About accountability, David asked. About compromise, the minister replied. They met the next day. The room was polished. The tone cordial. The offer clear. Funding for the foundation if David softened his stance. Public praise if he redirected blame. Silence if he accepted it. David listened patiently. Then he stood. My mother died waiting, he said calmly. There is no compromise for that. The minister's smile faded. You're making powerful enemies, he warned. David nodded. I know. The backlash intensified. A lawsuit appeared frivolous but loud. Anonymous op-eds questioned David's motives. Old business dealings were dragged into the light, scrutinized line by line. David welcomed it. Let them look, he told Samuel. We'll clean what needs cleaning. Through it all, Mama Adanna's strength waned. She tired easily now, slept longer, spoke less. One evening, David found her awake, staring at the ceiling. You're quieter, he said gently. I'm listening, she replied. To what? To the city, she said. It's changing. David sat beside her. You did that. She shook her head. No, I only waited long enough for you to do it. She reached for his hand. Promise me something, anything. When they offer you comfort in exchange for silence, remember this room. David nodded. The next day, the inquiry released interim findings. Negligence confirmed, records altered. Delays documented. The public reaction was fierce. Protests shifted direction. Candlelight vigils appeared outside hospitals. Families shared stories that had been buried for years. And then an arrest. A former hospital administrator was taken into custody. David watched the news without satisfaction. Justice, he knew, was not a moment, it was a process. That night, Samuel brought troubling news. Joy has agreed to testify, he said quietly. David looked up. Against whom? Against the hospitals, Samuel replied. She says she knew about pressure placed on staff, about donations tied to silence. David absorbed this. Why now? Samuel hesitated. Maybe guilt, maybe self-preservation. David exhaled. Either way, it matters. Joy's testimony shook things further. It also cost her. Friends distanced themselves. Invitations vanished. She faced the consequences of stepping out of the performance she once valued. David did not reach out. He respected the distance. As the weeks passed, Mama Adanna's health declined steadily. Doctors were honest this time. She doesn't have much time, one said gently. David stayed. He canceled meetings, delegated decisions, sat by her bed. One night she spoke again. Do you hear it? She asked. Hear what? The waiting, she said. It's ending. David swallowed hard. You don't have to go, she smiled. I already stayed longer than I hoped. She took his hand, squeezing with surprising strength. Promise me one last thing. Yes. Don't make me a symbol, she said softly. Make me a beginning. David nodded, tears falling freely. I promise. Outside, the city lights flickered. Inside, Mama Adanna closed her eyes, peaceful, unafraid. And as David held her hand, he understood the truth of her waiting. It was never for money. It was for a moment when truth would no longer need permission. Mama Adanna's breathing grew shallower as the night stretched on. The machines beside her bed hummed softly, indifferent to the weight of the moment. David Chibwe sat unmoving, his hand wrapped around hers, afraid that if he loosened his grip even for a second, she might slip away. He had stood in boardrooms without blinking, faced hostile crowds without shaking, walked away from a wedding watched by millions without fear. But this terrified him. Mama, he whispered, I'm here. Her eyes fluttered open slowly as if waking from a long dream. When she saw him, a faint smile touched her lips. You stayed, she murmured. I told you I would. She breathed out softly. Good. The door opened quietly. Samuel stepped in, his face heavy with the kind of respect reserved for sacred spaces. He nodded at David but did not speak. Mama Adanna's gaze drifted to him. You are the other boy, she said weakly. Samuel stepped closer, kneeling slightly so she could see him. Yes, Mama, she smiled. Your mother would be proud of both of you. Samuel's eyes glistened. Mama Adanna turned back to David. There is something I must say. Before I go. David leaned closer. I'm listening. She swallowed with effort. After your mother died, I stayed at the hospital for days. I wanted to make sure she wasn't alone in death the way she had been alone in waiting. David's chest tightened painfully. I promised her something, Mama Adanna continued, that if I ever saw her son again, I would not let him forget her pain or her love. David closed his eyes as tears fell freely now. You kept that promise, he whispered. She nodded faintly. Now, you must keep yours. I will, David said firmly. Everything we started, it won't stop. Her grip tightened for a brief moment, surprising him. Remember, she said, her voice barely above a breath, change is not loud at first. It grows quietly, like waiting. Then her hand relaxed. The machines beeped once, then again. A long, steady sound filled the room. David felt the world tilt. No, he breathed. No, please. The nurse rushed in, followed by the doctor. They checked vitals quickly, efficiently, gently. Then the doctor looked at David and shook his head. I'm sorry. David didn't move. He didn't scream. He didn't collapse. He simply leaned forward, resting his forehead against Mama Adanna's hand. I won't forget, he whispered. I swear. The room felt impossibly still. Outside the clinic, dawn was breaking. News of Mama Adanna's passing spread quietly at first, then like wind through dry grass. Not through headlines, but through whispers, through messages, through people who had seen her sit patiently at the bus terminal day after day. By afternoon, flowers appeared at the bus stop, candles, notes, small envelopes with $10 bills inside. People who had nothing gave what they could. David stood at the edge of the crowd unrecognized, watching strangers honor a woman most of them had never truly known. "She waited for all of us," someone said softly. The funeral was simple. No grand speeches, no televised ceremony, just a small gathering at a modest church near the terminal. David spoke last. "She taught me that dignity is not something you give," he said quietly. "It's something you protect. She protected it every day of her life." He paused, steadying himself. She waited so the truth could arrive. Now, it's our turn to carry it forward. As the coffin was lowered, David placed something inside, an envelope, $10. The inquiry did not slow down. If anything, it intensified. More records surfaced, more testimonies emerged, the arrest count grew, policies were rewritten, emergency funds were established, this time without conditions. The Esther Chibwe Care Initiative expanded beyond hospitals, free clinics, legal aid, transportation vouchers for patients, training for nurses to speak up without fear. David refused to attach his name to any building. "Put hers," he said. "She waited longer than I ever could." Joy Sharuio watched from a distance. She testified fully, told the truth, named names. It cost her influence. It cost her comfort. But when she left the courtroom, she felt something unexpected. Relief. She sent David one message. "I don't expect forgiveness. But thank you for choosing truth when I couldn't." David read it once. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Months passed. The city changed in small ways first. Faster admissions, clearer procedures, staff who dared to say no to corruption. One morning, David returned to the bus terminal alone. He stood at Mama Adanna's old spot, watching people hurry past. A young boy approached hesitantly. "Sir," the boy asked, "are you waiting for someone?" David smiled gently. "No, I came to remember." The boy nodded as if that made perfect sense. As David turned to leave, he noticed a new sign fixed near the bench. "This place honors Mama Adanna, who waited so others wouldn't have to." David felt his throat tighten. He placed his hand on the bench one last time. "Your waiting wasn't in vain," he whispered. And as he walked away, the city moved on around him, still imperfect, still struggling, but no longer silent. Because one woman had waited, and one man had finally listened. Grief did not arrive all at once for David Chibwe. It came in waves. Some mornings he woke with a strange calm, as if Mama Adanna were still somewhere in the city waiting, watching, patient as ever. Other days, the smallest things broke him. A blue scarf in a market stall. A woman sitting alone near a bus stop. The number 10 scribbled on a receipt. But David did not stop. If anything, he moved with more intention than before. The inquiry reached its most dangerous stage, the point where truth threatened not just reputations, but entire networks. Hospitals denied wrongdoing until evidence forced their silence. Officials resigned, then reappeared on talk shows claiming ignorance. Lawsuits multiplied. David answered with transparency, every document released publicly, every meeting recorded, every decision explained. "You're exposing yourself," Samuel warned one night as they reviewed yet another stack of files. David nodded. "That's the point." Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. Anonymous donors withdrew support from unrelated projects. Old allies stopped returning calls. Threats came wrapped in politeness, advice, concern, suggestions to step back and let the system handle it. David refused. He had learned something from Mama Adanna. Waiting without purpose was suffering. Waiting with purpose was power. One afternoon, as David prepared to address a panel on healthcare reform, a familiar face appeared in the audience. Joy Sharuio. She sat alone. No entourage, no polished smile, just quiet attention. David noticed her but did not change his speech. He spoke about delays, about dignity, about the cost of silence measured not in money, but in lives. When he finished, the room stood in applause. Joy did not clap. She waited. After the crowd thinned, she approached him. "You kept going," she said softly. David nodded. "I said I would." She hesitated. "I thought this would destroy you." David considered her words. It almost did. But it also gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. "What's that?" Joy asked. "Direction." Joy looked down. "I'm leaving Lusaka." David wasn't surprised. We're somewhere smaller, she replied. Somewhere I can rebuild, quietly. He met her gaze. I hope you find peace. She smiled faintly. I hope you don't lose yours. They parted without bitterness. That evening, David visited the public ward where Mama Adanna had insisted on staying. The bed was occupied now by a young mother holding a sick child. David watched as a nurse approached immediately, no hesitation, no demand for payment before care. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. David stepped outside and called the driver. Take me to the terminal. At dusk, the bus terminal buzzed with life. Vendors called out prices. Children chased each other between parked buses. The bench where Mama Adanna once sat was empty but no longer forgotten. People still paused there. Some left flowers, some whispered prayers, some simply sat for a moment before moving on. David sat too. A man approached cautiously. Sir, are you the one from the news? David nodded. The man hesitated. My father. He lived because of the changes you pushed. They didn't make him wait. David's chest tightened. I'm glad. The man placed a folded bill on the bench. For her. $10. David closed his eyes. As months passed, the inquiry concluded with sweeping recommendations. Emergency care laws were revised, oversight committees formed, whistleblower protections expanded. The changes were not miracles, but they were real. On the anniversary of Mama Adanna's passing, a small ceremony was held, not grand, not televised, just a few people, candles, stories. David spoke last. She waited for the truth, he said. Now we wait for the work to continue. He paused, then added, and we do it together. Afterward, David returned home alone. He stood by the window watching the city lights, feeling the quiet settle around him. For the first time in a long while, the silence did not feel empty. His phone buzzed. A message from Samuel. They're offering you a seat on the National Reform Council. David stared at the screen. This was the moment many would chase. Power, influence, a seat at the table. He thought of Mama Adanna's words. Don't make me a symbol. Make me a beginning. David typed back, only if the council meets in public, publishes everything, and includes patient representatives. A pause. Then Samuel replied, they agreed. David exhaled slowly. The next morning, David returned to the bus terminal once more. A young woman sat near the bench, eyes tired, a child sleeping in her arms. David approached gently. Are you all right? She nodded weakly. Just waiting for the bus. David sat beside her, not as a billionaire, not as a symbol, just as a man who understood waiting. He reached into his pocket and placed a bill on the bench. $10. The woman looked at him in surprise. That's too much, she said quickly. David smiled softly. It's exactly enough for today. She hesitated, then whispered, thank you. David stood and walked away. Behind him, the city continued, imperfect, loud, alive. And somewhere in that movement, the waiting was no longer lonely. Because one woman had shown what patience could do, and one man had learned that listening could change a nation. Time did not slow down after the reforms. If anything, it moved faster. David Chibwe soon learned that change once set in motion demanded more than intention. It demanded endurance. The National Reform Council meetings were long, uncomfortable, and public, exactly as David had insisted. Cameras recorded everything. Transcripts were published within hours. Victims spoke directly to officials who had once been unreachable. Some council members resisted. Others postured. A few genuinely listened. David did not dominate the room. He remembered Mama Adanna's way, quiet, patient, unwavering. When tempers flared, he asked questions instead of making speeches. When blame shifted, he brought it back to systems. When compromise was suggested at the cost of dignity, he refused calmly. You're not acting like a politician, one official said after a heated session. David replied, I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to fix what's broken. Outside the council chamber, life continued. The Esther Chibwe Care Initiative expanded again, this time into rural areas where waiting was even more dangerous. Mobile clinics traveled to villages. Emergency funds were pre-approved. No signatures required. No humiliation built into survival. David visited often. He listened to farmers, mothers, elders who had lost children simply because help arrived too late. Each story reminded him why he had stopped a wedding, why he had chosen discomfort over performance. One afternoon, Samuel joined him on a visit and watched quietly as David sat under a tree listening to an elderly man describe a long walk to the nearest hospital. "You've changed," Samuel said later as they drove back. David nodded. "So have you." Samuel smiled faintly. "I used to think success meant escape." And now David asked, "Now I think it means return." That evening, David visited the small memorial at the bus terminal. The bench had been reinforced. Fresh paint. A plaque polished by countless hands. Someone had left flowers again. Someone else had left bread. David sat letting the noise of the city wash over him. A young man approached hesitantly. "Sir, are you the one who knew her?" David nodded. "Yes," the young man swallowed. "My mother used to sit near her. Mama Adanna used to share food with her when she had nothing." David smiled. "That sounds like her." The man sat beside him. "I used to think waiting meant weakness." David looked at him. "And now I think waiting means believing something better is possible." David felt his throat tighten. As the sun dipped lower, David stood to leave. Before he could, a small voice stopped him. "Uncle," he turned. A little girl stood nearby holding her grandmother's hand. The grandmother smiled shyly. "She told me to thank you," the woman said, "because my granddaughter was treated without delay last month." David knelt in front of the girl. "I'm glad you're okay." The girl nodded solemnly. "Mama says I don't have to wait anymore." David stood slowly, emotion pressing heavily against his chest. That night, alone in his apartment, David opened an old box he had kept sealed for months. Inside were his mother's belongings. He held Esther Chibwe's scarf, gently pressing it to his palm. "I remember now," he whispered, "not just her suffering, her love, her hope." Weeks later, the final inquiry report was released. It was brutal, honest, unavoidable. Reforms were mandated, oversight enforced, accountability demanded not as punishment but as prevention. David stood before the press one last time. "This isn't the end," he said calmly. "It's the beginning of responsibility." Someone asked, "Do you regret stopping your wedding?" David paused. Then he answered truthfully, "No, because I gained something far greater than what I lost." "What was that?" the reporter pressed. David smiled softly. "Clarity." In the months that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. David did not remarry quickly. He did not rush to fill the silence. Instead, he learned to live with it. On the anniversary of Mama Adanna's first meeting with his mother, though no one else knew the date, David returned to the terminal at dawn. He placed $10 on the bench, then another, then one more, $30. "One for her," he said quietly. "One for my mother, one for anyone who's still waiting." As he turned to leave, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the kind that comes from having everything, but the kind that comes from knowing what matters. David walked back into the city, not as a savior, not as a symbol, but as a man shaped by kindness he did not earn and responsibility he chose to carry. And somewhere beyond the noise, beyond the traffic and voices, the waiting finally came to rest. Because one woman had waited with dignity, and one man had listened with his whole life. Before this story ends, take a moment to breathe it in. Mama Adanna never changed the world with power money or a loud voice. She changed it by waiting with dignity, by believing that kindness given quietly still mattered even when no one was watching. She never asked for more than she needed, not because she lacked ambition, but because she understood something many people forget. Character is revealed in what we give when we could take more. David Chibwe's journey reminds us that success without conscience is empty. He had wealth, respect, and a future carefully planned, but it took one forgotten woman and $10 a day to reconnect him with his humanity. Real growth didn't come when he became rich. It came when he chose truth over comfort, responsibility over image, and action over silence. This story teaches us that waiting is not weakness. Sometimes waiting is faith, sometimes it is courage, and sometimes it is the quiet strength that gives another person the chance to finally do what is right. So ask yourself today, who is waiting near you that you've stopped seeing? What truth have you delayed because it was inconvenient, and if you were given the chance to listen, would you? If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to know what part moved you the most. And if you believe stories of kindness, moral courage, and human value still matter in this world, subscribe to this channel. More stories like this are waiting for you.